What would happen if a boss secretly returned to his own restaurant and discovered it had rotted all the way to its very soul? Ethan Ward sat silently in his spacious office, his eyes fixed on an old photograph carefully placed on the desk. In that photo, taken 12 years ago, he stood in the kitchen of Solara Prime, the very first branch of what would later become the Solara restaurant chain. His smile was bright, his eyes full of hope. Back then, Solara was just a small dream built with his own two hands, where every dish, every fold of a tablecloth was personally inspected by him, and every employee was trained with his heart, not just his words. That was the Solara he created, a place where every guest felt respected, where every meal was more than just food, it was a thank you to those who chose to dine with them. But now, Ethan was no longer the man in that photograph. Success had pulled him too high, too far away from the kitchens he once called his second home. Solara had grown into a massive empire with 32 locations across the country, attracting countless investors, dragging him away from the comforting sizzle of olive oil and the rhythmic sound of chopping boards, locking him instead in tense meetings, endless reports filled with numbers and flashy promises from his management team. He kept telling himself everything was fine, that the system he built was solid enough to run without him watching every detail. But strange signs began to appear, quiet and persistent, like tiny cracks on what seemed to be a solid wall. Financial reports still looked perfect, but ingredient costs were rising suspiciously with no reasonable explanation. Inventory records showed bizarre discrepancies, with stock mysteriously disappearing without anyone knowing why. And worse than all the numbers were the rumors, vague but troubling, of staff losing their honesty, of hands secretly stealing from the very restaurant he once considered his pride. Ethan was not the type to be shaken by a few mismatched numbers or unverified rumors, but his heart, the heart of a man who had lived his life protecting Solara's honor, refused to ignore it. Smooth explanations from his managers could not silence the instinct screaming inside him. Perfectly polished reports could not mask the growing unease gnawing at him day by day. He had trusted numbers for too long, and that trust had pulled him away from the core values Solara was built on. That night, Ethan stayed in his office until late, the warm yellow light of his desk lamp casting shadows on his face, lined with fatigue and sleeplessness. The photograph in front of him seemed to glare back like a merciless reminder of why he started it all. He picked it up, stared at it for a long time, and whispered, his voice low but filled with determination, "If Solara has truly died, I'll be the one to bury it." His words echoed in the silent room like an oath. The next morning, he didn't walk into his office as usual, didn't show up for any meetings. Instead, he quietly left the Solara management building, unnoticed by anyone. He vanished from the world of contracts and reports, returning to the place where it all began, Solara Prime, the jewel of his empire, the pride that once made him work 18-hour days in the kitchen just to perfect every dish. But this time, he wasn't returning as Ethan Ward, the founder, the respected leader, the man employees admired. He returned as a stranger, wearing an old night guard's uniform, a pair of thick black-rimmed glasses hiding his familiar eyes, and a fake name tag clipped to his chest. No luxury car, no respectful glances, just a middle-aged man walking into his own creation as if he were nobody. Driving toward Solara Prime, Ethan's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind tangled in doubt. It had been years since he last set foot there, and now he wondered if it was still the Solara he once knew, or just a hollow shell running only for profit. But deep inside, beneath the lingering disappointment and thick layers of suspicion, a faint hope still flickered that maybe he was wrong, that maybe the people he once trusted had kept the flame he had passed on to them. And if they hadn't, then tonight would be the first night he would see with his own eyes whether Solara was still alive or already dead. On his first night as the night guard, Ethan Ward stood still in front of the large glass window in the hallway behind Solara Prime's kitchen. The hum of the exhaust fan roared relentlessly, dishes clattered harshly against each other, and the smell of burnt oil seeped through the kitchen door. Things that once felt like a sweet symphony to him now sounded chaotic and lifeless. He sat in the small security room, the flickering fluorescent light above his head threatening to go out at any moment, his back leaning against an old plastic chair that creaked every time he shifted his weight. In front of him was a dusty table, its corners scratched and worn like a whisper that no one had cared to look after this place for a long time. He stayed true to his role, a silent, unnoticed new guard. People walked past him without asking his name or even nodding, as if he were just another old piece of furniture left behind. Ethan observed quietly, taking in every detail. A young waitress yawned as she carried a tray, placing salads on tables with rushed, careless movements. A kitchen assistant, instead of cleaning the prep counter properly, nudged a pile of vegetables off the surface with his shoe and brushed his hands as if it had nothing to do with him. At one point, Ethan spotted two kitchen staff whispering in a corner, exchanging a secretive laugh before quickly shoving something into a pocket. His sharp eyes caught everything, but he remained silent, writing it all down in the small notebook he always carried. None of this would ever show up in any financial report, but to him, these were the clearest signs of decay. On the second night, Ethan slowly walked down the hallway near the kitchen, pretending to check the back door. Voices spilled out from the break room, loud and careless. "If the old founder were alive to see this, he'd have a heart attack," a man laughed mockingly. "The old man? Please, no one cares who he was anymore. As long as the paycheck comes on time, who cares if Solara was ever great?" Laughter burst out, sharp and cruel, stabbing straight into Ethan's chest. He stood just outside the door, one step away, but didn't enter. His fist tightened, his knuckles turning white, yet his eyes stayed cold and frighteningly calm. By the third night, things had only worsened. Sitting in the cramped security room, Ethan heard servers cursing after guests left, calling them vile names he had never allowed in Solara's culture. Occasionally, he looked up at the old black and white security monitor. Though blurry and grainy, it was enough to catch fake smiles disappearing the second customers turned away, replaced by eye rolls and whispered insults dripping with contempt. Ethan wrote every detail, every word, in his notebook, his slow and deliberate handwriting carving these betrayals into his memory. Late that night, Ethan stared out into the backyard through the grimy glass door. His reflection looked back at him, the yellow light casting shadows on his face, highlighting the wrinkles around his eyes and the coldness in his gaze. He exhaled heavily, a deep, weary sigh, and murmured to himself, his voice low and rough, "This is no longer my Solara." In that moment, he was almost certain that what he had built with blood, sweat, and dignity had been replaced by something hollow, rotten, and filthy. By the fourth night, he had made up his mind. If he didn't find a strong enough reason to stay, he would end it all. But what he didn't know was that night would mark the beginning of a chain of events that would completely change his decision. The fourth night, cold wind slipped through the back door of Solara Prime, carrying the dampness of late winter rain. Ethan Ward sat in the security room, his eyes fixed on the yellowed wall clock, the ticking second hand moving steadily like a countdown. He had a feeling tonight would be different. Something in the air whispered that something unusual was about to happen. The clock struck 3 a.m, a time when most employees had already gone home. The kitchen had long fallen silent, and only a few cleaners should have remained. But Ethan knew the most suspicious things always happened in silence. He stood up and walked to the small window, the chill of the metal frame seeping into his fingertips as he rested his hand against it. The low, steady rumble of a truck engine approached from afar, nothing like the familiar delivery trucks he had known. The truck stopped in the back lot, its headlights switched off even before the wheels came to a full stop. Ethan stepped closer to the window, his cold, sharp gaze locked on the scene outside. 2 men jumped down, their movements quick and deliberate, like people who had done this many times before. They weren't wearing Solara uniforms, but what made Ethan's brows furrow was the driver, a man in a dark jacket with a small Solara logo stitched on his sleeve. Ethan narrowed his eyes, his heart tightening as he recognized him. Lucas Hargrove, once a pride of Solara, the brilliant head chef to whom Ethan himself had awarded a medal for dedication 5 years ago. Lucas pushed open the back kitchen door without knocking, without showing any paperwork. A kitchen staff member stepped out, avoiding eye contact, pushing a cart stacked with wooden crates and tightly tied black bags. The yellow light revealed familiar labels, the kind used only for Solara's most premium dishes. Wagyu beef, aged Italian cheese, jars of expensive truffle oil. Ethan didn't need to open the bags to know exactly what was inside, for he had personally approved every one of these imported ingredients. Lucas smirked faintly, patting the kitchen staff's shoulder in a gesture that felt more like a secret handshake than a casual touch. He turned to the driver, pointed at the largest crate, and murmured something before both men began loading everything onto the truck quickly. No paperwork, no signatures, no explanation. Ethan didn't blink, his eyes as sharp as blades in the darkness. Slowly, he pulled out his notebook from his pocket. The same pen he once used to sign the most important contracts of his life, now trembling slightly in his hand. But he didn't stop. He wrote down every detail, the truck's license plate, the exact time, every face, every movement, each stroke pressed so hard it nearly tore through the paper, as if he were carving it into his memory, into his very soul. As the truck rolled away, its taillights fading into the night, Ethan remained at the window. His hand pressed firmly on the notebook, knuckles prominent and trembling, not from fear, but from a quiet fury simmering like molten lava beneath the surface. Lucas, the man who had once bowed before him at that ceremony, now wore a triumphant grin while gutting the very heart of Ethan's creation. This was no negligence, no mistake, this was betrayal, the most brazen kind. Ethan closed the notebook and straightened, his eyes fixed on the empty lot where the truck had just left. In that moment, it felt as though every brick of Solara Prime was crumbling before his eyes. But deep within his gaze, beyond the pain, was something else, a cold, unyielding determination. Ethan understood this was no longer about quality control or protecting his reputation. This was war, and he would strike first. He returned to his chair in the security room, sat down, his hand still resting on the notebook, as if it were already a signed death sentence. In the dark, his voice rose, low but firm, like a cold promise. Lucas, you just chose their side, and I will personally end this. The fifth night, the atmosphere inside Solara Prime was heavier than anything Ethan Ward had ever imagined. He walked slowly down the hallway leading to the main kitchen, his worn security shoes creaking faintly against the tiled floor. The dim yellow lights cast shadows across his face, making him look even darker, more brooding. If management failures could be fixed with a few audits, what he was about to witness tonight made him understand that Solara was not just rotting in its system, it was decaying from its very soul. Ethan stopped in front of the staff break room. From inside came bursts of laughter, the sound of spoons clinking against plastic cups, and words so crude they were almost unbelievable. "Table 7 tonight, what a bunch of idiots. They paid $100 to eat Wagyu tougher than my grandma," a shrill female voice mocked, followed by the loud laugh of a young man. "Don't say that, dumb customers are a blessing. Give them the cheapest cut, bill them for the most expensive one, and they'll still say it's exquisite flavor." The laughter continued, bitter and raw, slicing through the thin wall like a blade cutting straight into Ethan's ears. He stood just a few steps away, his hand clenched into a fist, the veins standing out against his seasoned skin. For a moment, he almost wanted to burst in, slam his hand on the table, and shout in their faces, "This is Solara, not some casino for your cheap cons!" But he held himself back, his breathing steady like a man restraining a storm. Instead of going in, he quietly pulled out his notebook, writing down every single word, every sentence, evidence of a service culture that had completely collapsed. When he returned to the main kitchen, worse things awaited. Bright light reflected off the prepared trays of food. But what made his chest tighten was the sight of a kitchen assistant using his bare, greasy hands to lift imported cheese, the kind Ethan had once insisted must always be handled with gloves. No one said a word. No one seemed to care, not even the kitchen manager standing nearby, too busy laughing into his phone about some side hustle outside of work. Another staff member, scooping ingredients carelessly, whispered to his colleague, "Sold a whole case of leftover wine to a private client this afternoon. No one's going to check that, trust me." Ethan froze, his heart pounding hard in his chest, not out of sudden anger but from a deep, crushing disappointment. Every careless move, every greedy whisper, was proof that the Solara he had built with blood and tears had turned into a chaotic stage where everything was measured in profit, not trust. As he walked back down the hallway toward the security room, a group of servers passed by without even glancing at him. One young man sneered as he walked. "That night guard looks like a corpse, probably working here just to buy cheap beer. Since when does Solara hire people like that?" Laughter broke out again. No one objected, no one defended him. Ethan stopped in his tracks, his shoulders trembling slightly, but his eyes didn't waver. He stood there, listening, not because his pride was wounded, but because he wanted to carve this moment deep into his memory, to never forget just how far Solara had fallen. Back in the security room, he sat down on the old plastic chair, the flickering fluorescent light above his head still buzzing weakly. Ethan opened his notebook, today's page filled with rough but firm handwriting. Betrayal, not just in the kitchen, but in the hearts of men. He stared at the words for a long time, then closed his eyes, taking in a deep breath. In his mind, Solara Prime no longer appeared as a prestigious restaurant, but as a decaying body, rotting slowly from the inside, waiting for the day it would finally collapse. Ethan nodded slightly, as if delivering his own verdict. A cold thought crept into his mind. If this is what Solara truly is now, maybe it deserves to die. But he didn't sign that sentence just yet, because a small part of his heart still hoped, a fragile hope, that somewhere in this wreckage a faint spark might still be alive. And if there wasn't, he would be the one to extinguish it himself. At dawn, when the kitchen lights had gone out completely and Solara Prime lay in silence, Ethan Ward sat alone in the cramped security room. The weak glow of the flickering fluorescent light cast a dim reflection on his gaunt face, yet his eyes remained unnervingly sharp. On the table, his notebook lay open, filled with dense lines of writing, every detail of the wrongdoings, every word of betrayal recorded like an indictment against the very place he had once called his pride. Beside it sat a fresh sheet of paper torn from his pad, and on it, he had begun writing the first lines of a decision that would change everything. The pen moved slowly but firmly, each stroke carved with pain. His handwriting was cold and precise, requesting the permanent closure of Solara Prime. No investigation, no reform. The system is rotten, the culture is lost, and the honor is beyond saving. He didn't just list numbers or the evidence he had gathered. He ended with a bitter line that cut deeper than all the rest. This is no longer the Solara I built. Each word felt like a blade sinking into his own heart, but he kept writing because this was not a moment of temporary anger. This was the judgment of a man who had seen the deepest level of decay. When he set the pen down, his hand trembled slightly. Ethan folded the paper into thirds and placed it neatly on the table, staring at it as if he were looking at a lifeless body. In that moment, he no longer saw Solara Prime as a dazzling restaurant filled with light, no longer heard the clinking of plates, no longer smelled the aromas of the dishes that had once built its reputation. All he saw was an empty shell, a hollow carcass where the values he once held sacred had been trampled without mercy. He leaned back in the chair, his hands clasped tightly, his eyes closed. A long silence stretched endlessly. The ticking of the wall clock marked each second, each beat urging him to sign that death sentence. In his mind, the Solara Prime of its first day appeared vividly, the hot kitchen filled with laughter, tablecloths folded neatly, dishes prepared with absolute respect for every customer. Then the present crashed over that memory. Stolen ingredients shoved into black bags, mocking laughter at customers, greasy hands stuffing money into aprons. The two contrasting images made his chest tighten. Ethan opened his eyes and stared at the paper on the table. He reached for the pen, ready to sign, but his hand stopped the instant the tip touched the page. A voice, faint but clear, rose in his mind. Not anyone else's voice but his own, from many years ago, the man who once sat for hours in the kitchen teaching a young chef how to properly slice an onion, The man who believed Solara is not just a place that serves food, it's a place that serves respect. That voice asked him one slow, deliberate question. "Ethan, have you really seen everything yet?" He set the pen down and leaned back, exhaling heavily. A part of him wanted to end it all right then. But another part, the part of him that still believed in something good, whispered that maybe, somewhere in this ruin, there was still something worth saving. He closed his eyes and told himself silently, "One more night. Just one last night. If there's nothing left worthy of saving, I'll end it tomorrow morning." Ethan slid the paper into a plain white envelope, folded it carefully, and placed it neatly at the corner of the table. He smoothed it flat with his palm, as if preparing to archive a death sentence. But his eyes, though still hardened, softened for the briefest moment, not out of hope, but because he refused to sign the final judgment without seeing one last time with his own eyes. He stood, grabbed the worn security jacket hanging on the back of the chair, and walked slowly toward the door. Tonight, he would no longer be a distant observer. He would listen more closely, look deeper, and if by tomorrow the answer remained unchanged, he would not hesitate. Before leaving the room, Ethan glanced at the envelope lying silently on the table and murmured, his voice low and hoarse like a final promise. "One last night, Solara, then I'll end you in the only way you deserve." On the final night, the sky above Solara Prime was blanketed by heavy gray clouds, and the rain began as a light drizzle before falling harder. Ethan Ward started his shift with a calm expression, but inside him, his thoughts churned like a storm. This was the night he would give Solara one last chance, and the night he was ready to accept the harsh truth if everything had truly rotted to its core. The clock ticked past 1 a.m. as Ethan stood in the hallway near the back door. The music from the kitchen was no longer soft like other nights. It was loud and pulsing, the bass vibrating in his chest. Through a slightly open door, he saw two kitchen staff, their uniforms sloppy, dancing on the kitchen floor that had once been required to remain impeccably clean. One slipped on grease pooled on the tiles, fell hard but still burst out laughing, while the other shouted, "Relax, nobody checks anything at this hour." The stove was still on. Trays of half-prepared food were abandoned, and plates smeared with grease lay scattered on the counters. To Ethan, it felt as if he were witnessing the funeral of the very values he had built. The laughter in the kitchen was just the surface of something deeper. Moving slowly through the hallway, he stopped near the storage room. There, 3 employees huddled in a dark corner whispering, but their words were clear enough. "Take half the crate of truffles, no one checks that inventory," one said. Another sneered, "Yeah, consider it a little bonus for putting up with this dump." A third voice, firm and almost proud, added, "We've worked here long enough, Solara owes us, not the other way around." Dry laughter followed, a sound that told Ethan they no longer feared being caught because to them, Solara wasn't worth respecting anymore. He stood still, silent, and didn't step forward. His heart pounded. Not from sudden anger, but from the deep, cold weight of disappointment. Slowly, he pulled out his notebook and wrote down every word, every sentence, his grip so tight that the pen's tip dug deep into the paper. Each stroke was like a blade carving cold cuts into the legacy he once cherished. But the final drop that broke the glass wasn't what happened in the kitchen or the storage room. It was what happened next. Near 2 a.m., Ethan went out to the back lot to check the rear door. The rain was falling heavily now, soaking his security jacket as he stood there, locked out after a gust of wind had slammed the door shut. He knocked once, then twice, but no one came. The music inside stayed loud, the laughter still raucous, and no one noticed or cared that someone was locked outside in the rain. 30 minutes passed. His jacket and hair were drenched, cold streams of rainwater running down his face, but Ethan stood still, not because he couldn't pound harder on the door or shout louder, but because he understood. This cold indifference said everything. Solara had not just lost its professionalism, it had lost its heart. When the back door finally opened, it wasn't because anyone had worried about him. A staff member simply stepped out for a smoke, glanced at him, smirked, and said, You're still here? Guess you fell asleep out here, huh? Before shutting the door again, without another word. Ethan didn't respond. He stood there, rain pouring down his shoulders, his silence so heavy that the employee didn't even realize something far greater than a simple greeting had just been lost. Returning to the security room, Ethan sat back on the old plastic chair, rainwater dripping from his hair onto the open notebook. He picked up his pen and wrote the final line of the report he had already decided on. Beyond saving, the culture is dead. This time he didn't hesitate to sign his name. But strangely, an emptiness crept into him, mixed with a small, unanswered question. Is there truly nothing left? He closed the notebook, his hand resting on the envelope containing the closure order he had prepared the night before. By morning it would be sent, and for him, Solara Prime would officially end. But what Ethan didn't know was that before dawn, something small yet powerful would change everything. That morning, dawn crept in slowly, weak sunlight breaking through the thick clouds covering the sky. Ethan Ward sat alone in the small security room, the old plastic chair creaking under his weight. On the table, the envelope containing the order to shut down Solara Prime lay still, like a death sentence waiting to be carried out. He placed his hand on it, his fingers tracing along the edge of the paper, his eyes heavy with thought, closing from time to time as if trying to erase the images of the past 3 nights. He thought about how easy it would be just bring this envelope to the office this morning and Solara Prime would officially close, ending all the rot and betrayal. But just as his hand moved to pick up the envelope, his eyes drifted to an old drawer in the corner of the table, its surface covered with a thick layer of dust as if no one had opened it in months. Without knowing why, he stood and opened it, almost as if guided by instinct. The drawer gave a dry, creaking sound, revealing a few scattered items: a broken pen, an old lighter, and a small folded piece of paper buried under the dust. Ethan frowned, leaning down to pick it up. The paper had yellowed with age, its edges slightly frayed as if it had been opened and refolded many times. Slowly he unfolded it, each crease feeling like it held a secret long forgotten. When the handwritten words appeared, his heart sank. 12 simple words, neat but full of sincerity, read, "Thank you for watching over our sleep, sir." No signature, no name, just slightly slanted letters, written with clumsy strokes yet overflowing with gratitude. Ethan read the words slowly, his eyes softening with every line. For 3 nights, all he had heard were mocking laughs. All he had seen were indifference, selfishness, and betrayal. Yet now this tiny note carried more weight than all of that combined. He wondered who had left it, and then a name rose quietly in his mind. Maria Alvarez, the middle-aged cleaning staff who always worked quietly through the night, someone no one really paid attention to. Ethan recalled those early mornings when he sat in the security room, a small piece of bread neatly wrapped in a napkin always placed on the table beside him. He had once thought it was just leftover food someone discarded, but now he understood. It wasn't leftovers. It was a quiet gesture of kindness from someone who expected nothing in return. Ethan sat back down, the piece of paper resting in his hand, light as a leaf but heavy as a stone pressing on his heart. In that moment, the horrible images from the past 3 nights seemed to fade, making way for something else, something he had once believed in when building Solara. As long as there is still one decent person left, Solara is not truly dead. He lifted the paper closer to his eyes, the morning light shining across the faded handwriting. He read it again, then a 3rd time. Each time felt like hearing Maria's voice, gentle, humble, and full of sincerity. Ethan smiled faintly, the first genuine smile in days, his eyes glistening not with weakness, but because he had finally found a reason to believe that things could still be saved. He slipped the paper into the pocket closest to his heart, smoothing the folds with his fingers. Then he looked at the envelope on the table, the death sentence for Solara Prime. He didn't tear it, nor did he sign it. He simply pushed it gently aside. His eyes no longer held the gaze of a man ready to bury everything, but of someone ready to start again, even if it meant facing the hardest battle of his life. Ethan stood, slung his worn security jacket over his shoulders, and as he stepped out of the security room, he whispered, his voice low but firm with determination. "Thank you, Maria. You just pulled Solara back from the edge." And for the first time in years, he no longer felt alone in this fight. That morning, Solara Prime continued its chaotic routine. But for Ethan Ward, everything had changed. He walked through the familiar hallway, no longer the detached observer he had been on the nights before. In the breast pocket of his uniform, the small note with 12 simple words remained folded neatly, resting against his heart like a quiet reminder. Every heavy step he took now carried a strange new strength, a strength not born of anger or the desire to punish, but of a fragile faith that had just been reignited. Ethan returned to the security room, where the envelope containing the order to shut down Solara Prime still sat on the table, as silent as a shadow. He stared at it for a long moment, his gaze no longer dark as it had been the night before, but thoughtful and measured. Last night, he had been ready to end it all, to put a final stop to Solara Prime. But now, he knew he couldn't not out of fear of change, but because a single small note had proven to him that not everyone had betrayed him. Somewhere among the ruins, there was still a heart quietly preserving what he had once passed down: kindness. He sat in the chair, opened his notebook, and turned to the last pages. The furious words he had written over the past nights were still there, thick and heavy. But instead of adding more condemnation, he silently flipped to a fresh page. The blank sheet appeared before him like a second chance, a new beginning for him and for Solara. He began to write, not to record crimes this time, but to outline a plan. His strokes were slow and deliberate, each line firm and precise. Clean out the rot, remove the betrayers, rebuild with those who deserve it. And at the bottom he wrote a single sentence, a reminder to himself: Solara was built on kindness, and it will be saved by it. Ethan looked up at the envelope in the corner of the table. He picked it up, his hands no longer trembling as they had the night before. He opened it, removed the closure order, stared at it one final time and tore it in half, then tore it again into many small pieces. The scraps fell onto the table, the soft rustling sound like the end of a death sentence being overturned. He didn't smile, but his eyes carried something rare, a cold determination that pulsed with life. Standing, Ethan adjusted his worn security uniform. He walked slowly out of the security room, down the hallway leading to the kitchen. The staff glanced at him with the same indifferent looks as always, but he no longer felt anger. Instead, he watched them closely, his gaze sharp as a blade, but this time not only to record wrongdoings, but to find who deserved to stay and who needed to go. Before leaving the hallway, he stopped near the corner where Maria Alvarez, the woman who had restored his fragile faith, was quietly scrubbing the floor, her eyes focused as if this were the most important task in the world. She didn't see him, didn't know he was standing there, but Ethan simply watched in silence. In that moment, he understood that Solara Prime could still be saved, not by perfect reports or expensive dishes, but by people like her who worked quietly, holding on to what truly mattered. As he left, he whispered softly, just loud enough for himself to hear, "You don't know this, Maria, but you just saved an entire empire." Ethan stepped outside, taking in a deep breath of the crisp morning air. For the first time in many nights, his shoulders felt lighter. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be confrontations, opposition, and many doors would have to be closed for good. But now he had a reason to stay, and this time, he would no longer be a silent ghost haunting the place he had built. He was ready to return as who he truly was, Ethan Ward, the founder of Solara. That afternoon, the atmosphere inside Solara Prime was so tense it felt as if it could be sliced through. An internal announcement had been sent early in the morning. All staff must be present in the main dining hall at exactly 12 p.m., no absences. There was no signature, no explanation, but it was enough to set off murmurs throughout the building. Kitchen staff exchanged wary glances. Some whispered about a possible routine inspection, while others smirked confidently, believing they had mastered the art of bending rules and had nothing to worry about. They didn't know that the person behind that message wasn't an ordinary manager, it was the very founder of Solara. At exactly noon, the main dining hall was packed. White chef coats, black server uniforms, even warehouse staff filled the room. No one sat. All stood in small clusters, whispering among themselves, waiting. The murmurs buzzed through the air, all eyes fixed on the main door. And then, as it opened, silence fell like a heavy curtain. Ethan Ward stepped inside, no longer wearing the worn security uniform. He was dressed simply in a crisp white shirt, carrying nothing but an old notebook. His face was calm, but his eyes were as cold as steel. A few gasps broke the silence. Those who recognized him immediately went pale. He didn't need an introduction, because anyone who had ever worked at Solara knew his face. The man who had once graced magazine covers, the man praised as the soul of culinary excellence. Ethan stood at the center of the room, silent for several seconds. His gaze swept over every face. No words were needed, yet many found themselves staring down at the floor. He opened the notebook, his voice calm and steady, not loud, not rushed, but every word struck like a hammer. For the past 3 nights I have been here. You didn't know, but I heard everything. I saw everything. A few sharp breaths were drawn, uneasy glances darted around. Some tried to smirk, but their eyes betrayed them. Ethan continued, his tone firm, unwavering. I have watched Solara betrayed in its very own kitchen. Ingredients stolen, customers mocked, and the culture of respect I built torn apart. He paused, his eyes shifting to a corner of the room. Lucas Hargrove. The name sent a ripple through the hall. A broad-shouldered man with a sun-weathered face froze in place, his eyes wide with panic. Lucas tried to keep his voice firm. I don't know what you're talking about. Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he opened the notebook and read slowly. The 23rd, 3 a.m., Lucas Hargrove, wearing a dark jacket with the Solara logo, received 3 crates of Wagyu and truffles at the back door. Truck license plate number. Lucas's face drained of color, his initial defiance crumbling as he instinctively stepped back. Ethan looked at him, his expression not angry, only filled with deep disappointment. I gave you a medal 5 years ago. I was wrong to trust you. Ethan lifted his gaze, sweeping it toward 3 others, 2 kitchen staff and a server. He read their names aloud, listing their violations clearly, mocking customers, skimming ingredients, betraying the very principles of Solara. Each name called was followed by silence, heads bowing low, no one dared to speak. When the list ended, Ethan closed the notebook, his voice sharp and unyielding. As of now, you are no longer employees of Solara. Leave immediately. A heavy stillness fell over the room. The 4 stepped out, some with their heads down, some trying to keep a composed expression, but their eyes betraying them with fear. No one applauded, no one said a word. Only the sound of heavy footsteps leaving the room echoed, ending with the slow, weighted closing of a door. Ethan drew in a deep breath, turning back to the others. His voice softened slightly, though still strict. Those of you who remain still have a chance. But today is the final line. Either you change or you leave. Solara is not a place for betrayal. He paused, letting the silence sink into every corner of the room, into every heart. Then his gaze softened, his tone slowed, carrying a weight deeper than authority. But there are still people who make Solara worth saving, and we will start again with them. For the first time since entering, Ethan allowed himself a faint smile, his eyes moving toward the back of the room, where a middle-aged woman stood quietly, her hands still gloved for cleaning, as if her work mattered more than anything in the world. Maria Alvarez. Whispers rippled through the crowd, all eyes turning to her, the small woman who had worked quietly for years, unnoticed by most. Maria looked up, her eyes wide in shock, her hands trembling slightly. Ethan looked at her, his voice warm yet steady, a voice that carried both gratitude and conviction. "You are the reason I'm still standing here today." The room fell into a heavy silence when the name Maria Alvarez was spoken aloud. All eyes turned in surprise toward the thin, middle-aged woman, the one who had spent years quietly mopping floors, wiping down tables, never once drawing attention. Maria stood at the back of the room, her hands clasped together, rubber gloves still wet with streaks of cleaning water, her eyes uneasy as if she couldn't believe Ethan Ward had just called her name in front of the entire staff. Ethan walked slowly toward her, his eyes, for the first time during the meeting, no longer sharp and cold, but warm and steady. He stopped a few steps away, his voice deep and heavy with meaning. "Maria, you don't realize it, but you are the one who pulled Solara back from the edge. In the 3 nights I've been here, among all the betrayal and indifference, there was only one person who worked as if Solara was still worth believing in, and that was you." Maria lowered her head slightly, her hands trembling, her voice soft and hesitant. I was only doing my job, sir." Ethan smiled faintly, a rare expression after days of tension. He shook his head gently. "No, Maria, you didn't just do your job. You left me a small note, 12 simple words, but they weighed more than any stack of financial reports. Those 12 words reminded me that Solara is still alive, that there are still people who believe in the values I built this place upon." Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out the neatly pressed note. Holding it up for everyone to see, his voice rang out firm and clear. "This is what kept me here. Not contracts, not reputation, but a sincere thank you from someone who quietly protected the honor of this place when everyone else had forgotten." Maria took a small step back, her eyes glistening, her voice shaking as she spoke. I didn't think you would ever read it. I just thought if someone truly cared, they would know we still need someone to watch over this place the way you once did." The room stayed quiet, a few people lowering their heads, others shifting uncomfortably, as if confronted by their own reflection in a mirror. Ethan turned his gaze across the room, his voice deep and unwavering. "From this moment, Solara Prime begins again. Those who betrayed it no longer have a place here. For those who remain, you will relearn how to respect every dish, every customer, and the quiet colleagues like Maria, because people like her are the reason Solara exists." His eyes softened as he looked back at Maria. Reaching into his inner pocket, he took out a white envelope and stepped closer to her. Stopping directly in front of her, he extended the envelope with both hands, his voice warm yet resolute. "Maria Alvarez, you are no longer just a cleaning staff member. As of today, you are officially the cultural supervisor and night shift manager. You preserved the soul of Solara when everyone else forgot it, and I want everyone here to learn that from you." Maria's eyes widened, her hands trembling as she took the envelope, her voice choked with emotion. I don't deserve this. I'm just..." Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his voice firm but sincere. "You deserve it more than anyone else in this room." The silence stretched long. No one applauded, but the air in the room had shifted. The way people looked at Maria had changed, no longer indifferent or dismissive, but with respect, a feeling that had been missing at Solara Prime for far too long. Maria lowered her head, tears welling as she held the envelope tightly against her chest as if it were something precious. Ethan glanced around the room one last time, his eyes sharp once more, but now they carried not despair, but something new renewal. His final words echoed through the room, clear and deliberate, each word like an oath. Solara was not built on money or fame. It was built on good people. And starting today, Solara will be saved by those very people. As he turned to leave, Maria remained standing, clutching the envelope close, tears falling silently, but a faint smile touched her lips. It was the smile of hope, the hope that Solara would once again become a place people were proud to call home. Seen through the eyes of a man who built an entire culinary empire with his bare hands, Ethan Ward's decision was not just about saving a restaurant, but about saving its very soul. Because culture is not created by slogans on walls or polished reports, it is preserved by the quiet people who do the right thing even when no one is watching. And that is the most enduring foundation of any organization. If you too believe that kindness can change an entire empire, hit like to help spread this message, subscribe so you won't miss other inspiring stories, and don't forget to comment below with the words, "Keep kindness," because sometimes a single small action is enough to save an entire world.